and Sunday. You're going to hear all about why we do this in a few minutes and throughout the next little while together. There are just a few announcements today. First of all, we are having our coffee hour in the garden. And another announcement, welcome Bathurst Street here, because this is a joint service between Trinity-St. Paul's and Bathurst Street. And we'll do a few more announcements in a minute. But first, welcome. Welcome on this beautiful day. Welcome no matter what you believe. Welcome no matter what you do not believe. Welcome no matter what you have done. And welcome no matter what you have left undone. Welcome no matter who you are. And welcome no matter who you love. Because this is the Church of Christ, and in Christ's church, everyone is welcome. Ashwin.
Thanks, Sherry. Yes, I'm Ashwin, Chair of Church Board, and happy Father's Day, everyone, and what a beautiful, wonderful start to today. I'd just like to share, last week, of course, we discussed our congregational plan and the working group report, and we've already started to implement some of the first actions, including Dan Main has agreed to be our church secretary, so we'd like to announce that. Thank you, Dan Main. Thanks, Dan. And we held our first strategic retreat hosted by Doris and Doug, and we're off to a great start. And we look forward to the summer. So thank you all.
Yes, and just to remind you that Transformations, the first of its kind in Toronto, is happening next Saturday. This is a gathering of everyone, but in particular trans and non-binary folk who come together to look into all spiritualities. So you're all welcome. It's an official Pride event, which is saying a lot. It's going to be taking place, sort of like today, outside and inside Trinity-St. Paul. So do feel welcome to that. And next Sunday is our Pride service. Pippa Hamilton is going to be preaching at that service. So let's continue in love.
Nanabojo, Nindawagmaduk, Nakanasaduk, Gajewanane, Nadishnakas, Wabjeshi Dodamgaye. And that says, greetings in the name of Ojibwe, first teacher, to all my female and male relatives. I'm called Kind Man in Ojibwe, and I belong to the Martin clan. My other names are Dr. Hopi Lavallée. My people are Lenape, Britain and European. I was born on the Green River on the western edge of Massachusetts, where the Green River flows into the Housatonic River that goes down into the big ocean. It's now sacred territory of the Mohican, not to be confused with the Mohegan, and not to be confused with what you might have read in school about the last of the Mohegans. So all of those nations up and down that eastern seaboard, where I'm from, are what's called Lane Lenape, or Lenape, which means real people. And that's the grandfather tribe of all these different tribes that are now, some registered, some not, with the federal government. I didn't grow up knowing really who I was. I was gifted with this beautiful name, Hopi, though. My mom heard Thomas Ben Jacque, the Hopi messenger, talk in the 70s when I was born, and decided that that should be my name. To be a good Hopi means to be peaceful, kind, respectful, loving, gentle. That's what it means to be good Hopi. So the name of the nation is the path or the walk of the nation, of the real Hopi people. Then my other names, Lovell and Martin, both come from England. And if you know your Latin, I don't know if you still do Latin here in church, but Lovell comes from the name Lupellus, which is what the Romans called my ancestral grandfather, Little Wolf. He was a warlord on the northern shore of, I guess, Brittany, or now called France. And then when the Romans and the Britons and everybody crossed the English Channel, they met my other ancestral family and called them Martin, which is the god of war. And so Mars, right, Martin, the warriors. So my family from that English side goes back to, I guess, well, we just had that celebration in 2021, 400 years of colonization of the first ones that my family was amongst them to step off the boat in Plymouth Rock in, what was that, 14? No, 1621. Is that right? 1521. I can't do my math. But that, of course, wasn't the first of that people to come across the ocean. You've probably heard of Virginia and Jamestown and the Virgin Queen and maybe Sir Walter Raleigh and Raleigh cigarettes. So my family was also there. And the first thing that was taken from Lenape people was, well, in Ojibwe we call it sama, tobacco. That's why it's called, Raleigh cigarettes, Virginia tobacco, along with the women and children. So you might have seen the Walt Disney movie, Pocahontas. The real story is much more brutal and much more violent. And it's that taking of women and children, enslaving them. Before the slavery happened in this part of the world, the slaves of Anishinaabe were brought over to Europe. One of those slaves, what's his name? Squanto. It's what my ancestral grandfather wrote it down as Squanto, but he has lots of names. He's the one who helped my family settle in Massachusetts. So I grew up only knowing that. My uncle is called Kingsley Bradford Martin, after Governor Bradford. My great uncle, Charles Boynton Martin, did this research that his mom started. And what they did is they traced back those genealogy. And with great pride in the 1920s, 8 ways to salt water, and following all the male lines, as is the custom in genealogy. And in doing that, they could prove that they are the super Americans, which in a land of white supremacy is really handy. And so that's what they did, and so that's what I grew up with, was that same white supremacy. But my mom came along, married my Martin dad, and called me Hopi. And so people, when I was growing up, they'd look at me and say, "What are you, Dutch?" And I'd say, "Yes." "Were your parents hippies?" I'd say, "Yes." All of that, because it made it so much easier than to acknowledge the truth and to reconcile with that. So I spent a long time wandering around trying to figure out something that I didn't even really understand or know, but it was always with me. One thing was trying to figure out these ancestors who were always in my dreams, always talking to me, always bugging me. And it got to the point where I couldn't make sense of myself anymore. And so I was growing tobacco on one of these rivers here in Toronto. So Toronto is an anglicized version of a Wendat word, and you might have seen it now, it's pretty common, Tkaronto, something like that. In Iroquoian languages, which is how the linguists say, that means all the longhouse people, the planters. You heard Grandma Jacque this morning do that prayer, and you saw how we did things out there. You might not have noticed that Ojibwe circle starts in the east and then goes to the south. That was Wabanung, Jawanung, Ningabian, Giwednung. But if you go to gardeners like the Hopi or the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, the Wendat, the Dionondade, or the tobacco people, their story goes this way. And the reason it goes this way is it follows the rotation of the earth, because that's what they follow, is gardening the earth. So it's not right or wrong, it's just how you see it. So Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Odawa, Three Fires Confederacy, Lenape are hunter-gatherers, and they follow the sun. And that's because that's creation story that we started with. Nanabojo, first teacher, we understand him as coming from Skyworld. And the first thing that his toes touched when he came was Sama. And the first teaching that goes with that was, before you take anything from Mother Earth, give. And as pathetic human beings, we're totally dependent on her. And that's why you hear Grandma Jacque share her mom's teaching, which is Dodomake. And I've never heard anyone else say Dodom, as in Dodosh, like mum like this. They'll use different words, and they're not all right, they're all correct. But that one's really special, because it's so close to the heart, and it's so close to that state we are in as human beings, that no matter how old we get, we're completely dependent on her for our life. And so that first teaching then is to give before you take. Give life before you take life. And it's that teaching that changed my life. And I was planting this beautiful sama on the river, following the steps of the ancestors here, and having come from somewhere else with no relations, no knowledge of my clan, nothing. It was with a little Ziploc bag of this tobacco that I came stumbling back to Oise. I was actually there at Elizabeth Morley's retirement from the Jackman Institute, listening to Kat Krieger give that opening while everybody was talking, and hearing that beautiful big drum and the drummers give their sound there. And I was wandering around looking, and luckily the late Charles Pascal and Dr. Jan Pelletier, who was my previous professor from the 90s, they opened the door for me to come back and study at U of T. And I was stumbling around again, looking, what am I doing here? But I had my tobacco. And so with that tobacco, I came looking for help because I couldn't make sense of what was going on. And so I came the 7th floor of Oise, if you've ever been up there. It's now much improved, thanks to Dr. Jeffrey Ansloos. He's got this amazing international center there, but it was really dark and dingy up there before. And that's where the Indigenous Education Network used to have their offices. And so I came down that hallway with my tobacco in my hand, but this beautiful person here, Dr. Gokoomis Jacque Lavallée, heard something that I didn't hear, but it was plain as day to her. And it was the sound of all these little children fighting in the hallway. And they were all fighting, and they were kept saying and arguing over each other. Gajeo and Nane in Kaza. 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 And that last one, they barged into the room, and there's this giant here standing in the middle of her office, standing up, looking around. Who's making all this noise? And where's this coming from? And those little people came barging in, and I came stumbling in after them. And so the story goes that your name came before you. And so that name, Kind Man, that's how it came. And because I came in the state that I was in, having tried my very best to survive and thrive in a settler colonial world as a mixed person, both white and red, having been horribly abused by the Christian faith as a child, and having that way so drilled into me that the Western doctors eventually diagnosed me with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So you might have heard of PTSD, and that's where I'd like to say the natural, it's actually the healing of a person's brain after a traumatic thing that's beyond the human experience. So the brain goes through these remembrance, flashbacks, nightmares. You have like all these bizarre sensations because you're constantly reliving that trauma until your brain can consolidate that information and make it somehow manageable. Well, complex PTSD happens when that PTSD happens over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so that happened first when I was this big, and then again when I was this big and this big and this big, and then finally when I was this big, still happening. And so that put me in this state. And Grandma Jacque described me like an old willow tree, like all bent and broken and dying. And her beautiful response is always, "Oh, wow, look at that." And because of the family teachings that she carries from the Abitung and the Pamajuan families, and having been raised in the bush like she was before being taken here to residential school in Toronto, all that ceremony that you just heard a little tiny bit of, she already had. And I've often heard her say, especially as I was writing down her thesis for her, she did all her, got her doctorate of social justice education at 80 years old, all in the language, all through the oral tradition. But I had to write it down for it to be accepted, not as an honorary doctorate, but as an earned doctorate at the University of Toronto. But she did that. So proud of her. And the interesting thing was that her focus of her research was on Ojibwe healing psychology. the very healing psychology that she had learned from her family and from her cousin, Dr. James Dumont, who's 5th degree in the Medewagon, the Three Fires Confederacy, kind-hearted people. And so this healing ceremony is what put me back together. There was nothing in Western pharmacology, Western psychology, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Hopi back together again. But Nana Bojo could. And through these teachings, that's what put me back into this shape that you see, and able to talk about my experience. Because the thing about getting any experience of healing is you can't keep it. It's not for you. The 12th step, right? If you've been lucky enough to have survived alcoholism, like myself, the 12th step is you gotta help somebody else. So maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe this will help somebody. But this beautiful teaching lodge, it's called the 7 Stages of Life Healing Lodge, which you can look up and read about. Grandma Jacque shared a little part of it, of her walk through that, of how she was able to put together her life, of being experimented on as a tuberculosis patient, as 3 years old. There were a lot of tears were shed just in trying to write and document that story. For a little child to be taken to a white hospital in the 1950s, being the only one there, and then have these experiments done on her to see if they could find a cure for tuberculosis, which, you know, there isn't a cure for tuberculosis. The scarring's permanent. But they tried. And so the start of that story, you know, shares a bit of that. And then there's this beautiful part of going back up north to outside Shawniga First Nation Reserve. There's this really brilliance of this is going back to these Martin clan teachings, these Wabajeshi. So part of, as Wabajeshi, Martin clan, we're the warriors, we're the providers, the hunters, also the clan of adoption. Because from the beginning of the Ojibwe clan system, there was always knowledge that there's people who are lost in battle, and there are orphans that are made from that horrible act. And Wabajeshi have this commitment, requirement put upon them to take care of those orphan babies. That story first started with the moose. And if you've ever watched a baby moose get around, looks kind of like me. And so there I was stumbling around, and wonder of wonders, this beautiful Anishinaabe Kwe, who had survived all this and was Martin clan, whose dad was Martin clan. Now, where do you think Lavallée comes from? Because Martin clan means you're mixed. You've got your Anishinaabe, and then you're mixed with the surrounding nations. Before colonization, that could be, you know, out west to the Lakota or to the Lenape became part of that originally. But all the different nations surrounding, the Haudenosaunee and so on. But after colonization, that often meant the white or in-between Indians. When the English took over and beat the French, Plains of Abraham, Canadian history, etc., one of the first things they wanted to do was mitigate their legal requirements to First Nations, Indigenous people. If you've ever heard of the Royal Proclamation, 1764, 1763 was the Battle of Abraham, 1764 was the Royal Proclamation that said, any negotiation with Indigenous nations has to be from the Crown, because the Crown has a fiduciary responsibility to the First Peoples here. So just like if, you know, any of the treaties that were signed to try to make peace in Europe, there's requirements. And so in the requirements, there were things that were negotiated. So in order to limit those requirements, the English, what they did, and the Canadian government that you now know, was anybody who had a little bit French counted as French. Anyone who was black and Indigenous became black. So that the only ones they had to deal with were the registered Indians, the ones that were 100% Ojibwe, say, or 100% Dakota, or all of this 300 nations or more in Canada. And so what happened then was families like the Lavallée family would live on the edge or the outskirts, the edge of the bush, in between the reserve and that wild bush country, which no one had jurisdiction in, except for Anishinaabe. And so in that in-between place, that's where Grandma Jacque's Norman Lavallée father, Wabajeshi, Martin clan, built the square house for her 100% Ojibwe mum, Agnes Abitung, who kept all these teachings and had all these teachings. So the great advantage was that being at the edge of the bush, off the reserve, technically the Indian agent didn't have any jurisdiction over this, because that smoke that you smelt this morning, that song, all that ceremony, all of it was illegal. In Canada till I think it was 1951, 59. In the States where I'm from, 1978. All of it was illegal. It wasn't until that Religious Freedoms Act in 78 where Indigenous people could actually name their kids an Indigenous name, actually send up that smoke, practice any of their traditional beliefs. So a lot of this stuff was hidden. So that's how it was hidden in the bush at the edge of Shawnee First Nation. And because of that, all these teachings were preserved. And so that all happened before Jacque got taken to residential schools here. And you might not think that there's residential schools in Toronto. Does anybody know that? Have you ever heard of St. Mary's training school for delinquents? Delinquent white girls. We got one person's heard that. So you've heard of juvie, right? Kids who break the law can't be sent to grown-up prison, so they're sent to juvenile detention or like that. Well, that's where they took all of the Indigenous kids, all from the eastern shore of Georgian Bay. They all got sent down here and put in prison with those wicked white girls, is how Jacque likes to describe it. So you can imagine, as coming from that soft bush place to being thrown into the center of downtown Toronto with wicked white girls, the fight for your life. But there you go, warrior teachings. What makes a good Wabajeshi, I can tell from experience, is having really challenging circumstances to live through. And so that's how you get warrior teachings. So through all of that then, only because of this story, only because of the stories that came before of Jacque and her family, only because of the stories from Sagamuk coming out of the bush into that edge around northern Georgian Bay, only because of the stories going all the way back thousands of years to Bear Island and Temiskaming. Only because of all of that and that remembrance of that first one, Nanabojo. Some people, we used to say 44,000 years, old people would say, that's how old the story is. And then they said, well, we said that for a while, so we're going to think it's probably 45,000 years now. Maybe 46 now. But we had some relatives from what's now called Australia come and visit us at the Mother Earth Learning Lodge, Skakamigo-Kwe-Wigamik, which we have ceremony every Wednesday night in. And they came all the way across the ocean, and they were saying they had just found those petroglyphs, the rock paintings, just like we have here near Peterborough. And they carbon dated them to 64,000 years. The same teachings, right? Different parts of the world, same people. So these teachings go back 64,000 years at least, to a time before the destruction by the flood, and before the glaciation of the entire planet. And if you listen to the Hopi people talk, they've got stories of the time before the planet was destroyed by fire. So there was fire, there was ice, and then a flood. And the only reason that my mom heard Thomas Ben Jacque talking in 1970-something was because he was asked by his elder from the Coyote clan, I was looking that up, so the warrior clan of the Hopi, to go and deliver this message after they dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because the Hopi had stories that as soon as that begins, we're at this transition point where if the Hopi are not able to do their job, there will be another of these cataclysmic destructions, and this time by the air. And so the Hopi have a whole set of stories that explain everything that's happened. You can look him up. Go look up Thomas Ben Jacque and go look at the Hopi message. In 1995, he was talking about the forest fires all across Canada and the US, saying this is going to happen. And so far, every single one of the Hopi stories have happened. And so he was commissioned to go and communicate this to the world. And one of his jobs was to go to the United Nations. Can you imagine now the United Nations of the world being formed with no Indigenous people? That's what it is, or was. And so I think the first time he went and tried to get into the United Nations was 1953. Not even a chance. He tried again in 72. He tried again in 83. 1992, he was finally allowed in to get, I think, 15 minutes to talk on a Friday afternoon. And so they opened the doors of what he called the House of Mica, because the old Hopi couldn't understand what even a glass building would look like. But they said it was shimmering all like mica, which is that rock. And so they let him in on a Friday afternoon, and most people had gone home. There was a few left, and Oren Lyons from the Haudenosaunee gave out 4 yells. You might have heard Gokoomis give out those yells this morning to initiate the talk of all of these Indigenous people sharing their stories. And so Thomas Ben Jacque stood up and he put cornmeal on that dais or podium like this and started talking about all these things that were happening. And if the Indigenous people of the planet were not given their rightful space, their land, and the ability and freedom to do their ceremonies, the whole world would come out of balance again. And there would be that cataclysmic destruction. It wasn't a threat, it was just that's what's happening. Because if you think about it, when you sing, you heard that beautiful dream song from Gokoomis, inviting all those nations to come together just right here. That's how we started outside. When you sing, you resonate here. The word in Ojibwe for truth is debwewen, ode, o debwewen, the sound my heart makes. And so when you do that, it causes an effect. I had to go look it up because Grandma Jacque said, Doppler, what's that guy's name? Doppler effect. I had to go look it up, and all I could remember was standing by the highway. But no, the Doppler effect is that resonance that happens, the vibration that happens. And you know it as Christians. When Christians are getting together, you feel it. That's, I don't know what you call it. Some people, every Christian has a different name for it. But whenever people are doing something together, at least trying to do something good, it happens. There's a good feeling, and it resonates through the planet. So that's what Thomas Ben Jacque was talking about. You have to let us do our ceremonies. You need to make space for that. And so it's only after all these beautiful teachings here of the Ojibwe that put me back together. I was like, oh, maybe that's why I had to go back to school and get my PhD in developmental psychology and education and start looking after building all these little spaces for children. So that's my work. I created a company out of that old teaching that you heard of from Norman Lavallée, that Martin clan teaching, at the edge of the bush. So at the edge of all these beautiful bush teachings, just like we're at the edge of your church out there, making spaces for kids, just like you've got out there, so that kids, instead of growing up in indoor spaces like this, where the only living thing is us. But out there, there was some beautiful kids out there climbing the trees and everything. And I heard somebody say no, but that, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, it's like non-interference. We say that's beautiful. That's awesome. The Morley grandkids, you should see them come into the lodge and hop up and jump around, and they just make us laugh so much. Because as soon as you go and force a kid to do something, you stop that spark in their brain of the idea that they had, and then you impose your will on them. As soon as you do that, and this is why I went back to school, you stop the natural development of the human brain. And so what we've been doing with kids is not really learning or supporting natural development. A lot of it's just been controlling them and creating them in a system of control. I'm a big fan of the Matrix. But it's that same thing, the same concept, right? Learning to manage in a system that's killing the planet. So this work at the edge of the bush is to give kids, children, family, youth, a different experience of growing up close to the earth, just like Grandma Jacque got a little bit of time. We want to give them a whole lot of time so that they can touch their mom, feel their dad. We say Mother Earth, Father Sky, and have that interaction with all those living things. And because all that interaction is what supports this brain development. After, I think it's only recently, maybe 10 years, why Charles Pascal and Dr. Fraser Mustard and all those smart people were doing that work at OISE was because they started being able to do non-invasive brain mapping and being able to take a picture of kids when they're in this responsive, kind, and loving environments. And the brain lights up. But if you hit them, hurt them, experiment them on them, do all of those horrible things that were done to those children in residential schools, you permanently damage that brain development. But I'm living proof that it can be put back together again. But there's none of that knowledge in Western psychology or Western education. That knowledge is available if you come to the edge of the bush, in between. And so I think that was what I was supposed to talk about today, was how to come to the in-between spot. And maybe I talked more than I'm supposed to, but I think it's useful. This old protocol, just like international relations, is how you do it. And we did it outside, and I did it at the start of my talk. And the first thing is come with tobacco. In this territory, every living being here knows this plant medicine. If you come and you give first, you bring yourself into that natural circle, natural law. If you don't believe me, take a deep breath. It goes in a circle. You can't just breathe in. You cannot just take. It's physically impossible. The trees are the same way. They can't just breathe in carbon dioxide. They have to give oxygen. Everything alive on the planet follows that sacred circle. Human beings are the only ones with choice. Animals are blessed with instinct. So with choice, if you choose to start with giving, you can bring yourself into that natural law that the old Ojibwe talked about forever, that Thomas Ben-Jacque was talking about forever. So that's the first step. The second step is lighting a small fire. Old way to come into the territory around the Great Lakes was that when you came out of the bush, you'd light a little fire, just like you saw us light out there. When you come into the cleared territory, you'd light a fire. Whether you're landing at Pearson International Airport, and I lit a fire as soon as I was there, or you came on a boat, a canoe, a tall ship, whatever. When you got to the beach, you'd light a little fire. And watch to see the fire department come. It's amazing when you do this with kids. They all stop what they're doing and they come to see what's going on. If you smell that smell, guaranteed you're going to look, where did that come from? What that fire does is it sends a signal from Mother Earth to Father Sky and everything in between. Hey, we're doing something special here. Come and see. It's an invitation. And when you come, the natural way to sit around a fire so that everybody has equal warmth, equal heat, is in a circle. Ojibwe always keep the east, well, actually, I should say Haudenosaunee do it too. They always keep that eastern door open of that sacred circle to allow the big sacred fire at the center of our solar system to come shine in there. This same sacred fire that's in the sun is in the heart of Mother Earth. We said Nami-Ingiajik, everything under her skin. She has a beating heart just like you, and it's made of fire and lava. It's a gift from her dad, the sun. And then if we use the medicines from the earth, if we eat from the earth, and we start with our tobacco like you did today, you're part of that. You're connected to that, and you feel there's a fire in your heart. That's what we're inviting when we sing that invitation song, is not just you, but every one of your ancestors that has ever walked the planet to come together around that sacred fire. And then the first words out of our face, what did you hear Grandma say this morning? Ge-che-miigwech. Thank you. A big giant thank you, all the way from the bottom of my heart to the top of the sky world. So when you talk about land acknowledgement, that's the starting place, at least from these teachings, is your heart. And then as far as you can see into outer space, the Milky Way, that dust in the sky that surrounds this part of the universe, without those stars, there'd be no life on Earth. So my favorite land acknowledgement is when they show like a picture from the Hubble telescope and say, Nishnabé Ke'ing, our sacred territory. It's all of it. So when you come to that edge then, and you're sitting in that circle just like you are here, these are 4 basic steps you can learn to say that connect with birth or the beginning, that tobacco, with that smoke, with that song, and with expressing your gratitude. Alrighty, there is going to be a test, so you don't have to take notes, but here it is. Who are you? What names were you given at birth? You heard me tell a long story about that. It took a lot of work. I know it's not easy. Colonization tells you to cut your hair and forget about everything so you can work in a machine shop and go to war. That's why. Right? Start a new life, starting a new thing every day. Forget about where you came from. We'll give you values. They're called corporate values. It's so silly, starting an Anishinaabe organization, we don't have to come to an agreement about what our values are. It's the 7 grandfather teachings. That's been the way it's been for 64,000 years. But think about it, we have to come up with our corporate values. So who are you? Not what you do, but who are you? What are your names? And then where did you come from? I talked about the Green River. I talked about all that place that I came from. I talked about Ishanagay. Then who are your relations? Who are you related to? Who are your people? Finding that out is a beautiful thing. And the way I heard it was that when you acknowledge those relatives, You send blessings there. When you acknowledge the land, like I didn't even want anything to do with America. But as soon as I started talking about the land of where I came from, I started feeling a lot better. Because it's the land that birthed me there. My parents actually had me at home. And I came out right where two streets intersect. One of them's named after an Englishman, and the other one was named after Skagong, 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 the black goose in Lenape. When he flies across the lake and gets to Ojibwe territory, he changes his accent and says, Nagak, Nagak, Nagak. And so right there, I was born at that intersection, but I didn't know it. I started sending blessings over there, and I learned all kinds of things about myself. Most importantly, as I started to feel like I had roots in my feet, I knew where I stood. So even now, people will come and look at me and say, well, you're not a status Indian. You shouldn't be standing up talking. You're taking up space. You're not Indigenous because I don't count. Remember? I say, you're right. I don't count. But these are my people. These are my ancestors. This is who I am. This is where I'm from. These are my relatives. All that I'm sharing is upholding these beautiful teachings that come from Grandma Jacque's family. They all claim me as Anishinaabe. They look at me and all they see is red. And that's fine. The truth is I'm both. I think that's why I'm pink. Put them together. And so that's me. There's no other way to identify myself other than standing right at the edge, right by that fire, taking care of it, doing the best I can to speak from my heart to your heart. Those are the relations we're talking about. For sure, learn the last names of people. Learn how to say Anishinaabe. The A is silent. Anishinaabe, Sama, Oshkaabewis. It's a soft language. Learn how to say Haudenosaunee instead of Iroquois. Do you know what the word Iroquois comes from? It's a French word meaning snakes in the hair. How about the word Huron, like Lake Huron? It means, that's again a French word for the people with bristly, spiky hair. Imagine being named for your haircut. Learn to say the name in the language that, how people want to be called. Like with pronouns, somebody asked, what is your pronoun? How do you want to be identified? What a nice, respectful way to talk to somebody. Same with Indigenous people. There's no such thing as an Indigenous nation. It's 300 different names. Get to know some of them in your neighborhood. So, Dionondare, tobacco people. Arawonderon, the neutral people. Wendat, Huron, Haudenosaunee or Seneca of the Haudenosaunee, and then the Mississaugas of the Credit. Those are the three fires, Confederacy, the Ojibwe, that are current caretakers. Learning that's a great thing. So you could include that in your relatives, but if you don't, you can't leave you out. Who are your relations? And then the last part that's most important is that you speak from your heart. What's in your heart? If you don't know what to say to somebody, start with giving. Start with gratitude. Start with thank you, what you're grateful for. So those 4 parts, who are you? Where are you from? Who are your relatives or your relations? And how is your feeling? What's in your heart? That's reciprocity for introducing yourself in an Indigenous context. Because that's how we both started today. I probably was in that beautiful song you heard. Did you give him tobacco for singing? So I think I'll say Gitchi Miigwech for listening, and I think there's something else on your program, and I thank you for your time. Miigwech.
I did volunteer, but the good news is that you get a few minutes to do this as well. So I thought about this, a different way to introduce myself in the same way that Hopi, Dr. Hopi was talking about. So I will do my best, and I will keep it very short. My name is Marjorie McCrae Calla, and I was named after my Aunt Marjorie. And tragically, in her 20s, she died in a fire. And so I carry her name, her trauma, and her kindness in my heart. I am a grandmother, a mother, a sister, a teacher, and a friend. I'm a settler whose ancestors came from Scotland, Ireland, England, and France, and settled in Indigenous land in Ontario. I have a special love in my heart for a piece of land in Muskoka, where my father, while I was in my mother's womb, built a cottage. And, whoops, is that better? Okay. And this piece of land is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, and it is a beautiful place that keeps me feeling so calm, and it's the trees and the animals that feed my soul and remind me that we are sharing this land. And today I feel very grateful to be here on this beautiful day and to be here with Hopi, Dr. Hopi and Dr. Jacque, and to introduce you to Albert Terrion, who is doing the beautiful drumming for us. So thank you. And I wonder if I could ask you, Albert, to come and introduce yourself as well. Okay.
Hello, I'm Albert Terrion. Albert Terrion. I'm Ojibwe and Cree, Wolf Clan. Been drumming and singing for 10 years now. Yeah, I sing with my little brothers. Yeah, that's me.
So I wonder if you could take just a minute and stand up and introduce yourself to the person beside you and include what is in your heart.
I'm wondering, since introductions are happening, if maybe we couldn't just introduce one another, especially if we don't know one another yet. My name is Lina Medalla, as you can see there, and just less than 10 years, I think. Nice to see all of you, and please feel free to say hello.
Hi, nice idea, Lena. My name is Jenny. I'm a member of Bathurst. My father comes from Russia. My mother comes from a farming family in Pennsylvania. And I'm on the beautiful island, Christian Island, which is an Anishinaabe reserve on Georgian Bay.
Thank you, Jennifer. I should have said my family are settlers and immigrants from southern Italy. We call.
When I introduce myself in an Indigenous context, I say, Bonjour, Roger Townshend, Indigenous, New Brunswick, Notanjiba, in Shaganash, which is, my name is Roger Townshend. I come from New Brunswick, that's where I was born, and I'm English. I could say a lot more about some of that. My ancestry is English and Scottish. I was named for a British officer who died at Ticonderoga in the what was called the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War in in North America. And his memorial in Westminster Abbey has statues of 2 Indigenous warriors on either side of it. I don't talk about that very much, but that just seemed a context. It was
Thank you, Roger. Great. Important information. Did you want to speak? I don't know if it's Ula or Francis, but please go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, though.
It's it's Francis now. I just want to say hello. I'm Francis from Bathurst United Church. So it's really nice to see Jenny and Judy and Ken and Kate. And I think I saw Kathleen Fillmore, did I? Anyway, and it's lovely to see you, Miriam, and those of you from Trinity-St. Paul's. I loved the idea of being on the edge, the edge with, you know, with your feet in at least on 2 sides, maybe more than that. But I love that. And anyway, thank you all for. I love being here today, and thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you. I think we might have time for more. If someone else wants to introduce themselves, and Judy and Ken, we kind of heard about you a minute ago, but if you wanted to say hello. And
okay, Ken McAvoy, settler of English and Irish extraction. My first ancestors came here in the late 1700s, settling east of Peterborough. Judy?
I'm Judy McCallum. I'm English and Scottish ancestry, a settler here. Family came around the turn of the century, and related to a few in Montreal area and the Toronto area, but I feel like I've lost touch with many of my relations.
So in keeping, I'm a settler, and my name is Sherry Mari Lucia Patricia De Novo. And my mother called me Sherry and misspelt it because she didn't speak French, and so she gave me the masculine version of Sherry, meaning dearest one, which I guess is why I'm so involved in trans and non-binary and gender politics now. On part, Mari was on the English side of the family. Patricia was never really acknowledged as being Irish. Interesting, right? Because, and then Lucia was if I wanted to sing opera, and that was from my Sicilian side, which is not the same as Italian. It's Sicilian, different dialect. But really, when I think about tribal realities, we're Celts. There were Celts all through the British Isles, all through Spain, all into Italy, and as far away as India and China. So that I share with many of you. I am mostly, and mainly though, profoundly grateful, Dr. Hopi and Dr. Jacque, for your existence among us, for your incredible education of us, for being loving enough to be here, and yes, and for your drumming, Alfred. Thank you for the sound of our heartbeat. Thank you for that. And the reason we do this is to pay rent, which we should do as settlers. So our offering will include the paying rent collection. Why rent collection? It's a symbolic recognition of the unjust dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their land, and a reflection of our desire for a more equitable sharing with First Nations in the future. The collection is a way to build relationship through a concrete act of repentance, and will be split, this offering, between Namarez, supporting Indigenous men, and the Native Women's Resource Center. We should never acknowledge land without giving some land back. The offering will be received.
was asked to give a thank you to these wonderful people today and asked specifically to pronounce their names correctly. I think Sherry has done a wonderful job of thanking you already, but I don't think it hurts to try again. So I'm going to start. I've learned by listening to you, Hopi, I've learned how to pronounce your name. So Dr. Gokoomis, I've always said the accent in the wrong place. Jacque Lavallée. Sorry, Jacque? Yeah, Jacqueline Lavallée. And I've always thought that was Lavallée. So I've learned a lot just from there, so thank you very much. And I am so pleased that grandmother is part of your name. That's just a wonderful way to have it. And then I'll go to Albert first. Albert, thank you so much for your leading us in here and your song from the front also. It's been so nice to meet you for the first time, and I really, really hope we get a chance to meet you again. Be wonderful. And now, Dr. Hopi Martin, I can get that far easily. I've been told not to pronounce the O, so it's Oshkaabewis. Okay. This is not easy for us settlers. Okay. I'm just blown away. I mean, you have taught us so much. I mean, we read, we and we learn the pronunciations all wrong. But speaking like that from your heart is just something we cannot get any other way. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you for what you're going to do in this service, because there's more stuff coming. So thank you ever so much.
We've come to the last part of our ceremony. And again, we send up thanksgiving. We honor the sky world and our beautiful creator, Ben Jacque. He is the one that created us and everything that we see. So we say, Gijamanado, Gichimigwech. You send your miigwetches up to the sky world. Woo! Wabanung the King, Gitchimigwetch. Jawanung the King, Gitchimigwetch. Ningabi and the King, Gitchimigwetch. Giwednung the King, Gitchimigwetch. Nahau Dodomak, Gitchimigwetch. To our beautiful Mother Earth, we express our appreciation. And we send our thoughts out to the grandmothers and the grandfathers who try to keep peace with us. And we say, Miigwech, 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 Miigwech. Ho ni konigana for all my relations. It's our way of saying amen.
everyone. I'm glad we said hello at the beginning and throughout. It is 12:15, and I just wanted to check in and say once again, thank you so much for being here, everyone, and thank you for our guests. So just in case anyone wanted, I know that we had started talking about our names and introducing ourselves, and not everybody got a chance to do that. So I just wanted to know if anyone wanted an opportunity to do that right now, or wanted to check in or anything before we say goodbye. Yes, putting it on. Okay. Judy and Ken, it sounds like you were trying to find your unmute, or no? Oh no, you're saying you're trying to say goodbye. Okay.
A note in the chat. Yeah, sorry, I have to leave to get onto other things.
Oh, okay.
But thank you so much to everyone, and hope to meet again in this larger circle.
Yes. Bye, Judy and Ken. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
And so it sounds like a few people need to go. So I'm thinking, okay, it's 15:15. It's great being with you today on Zoom, and I wish you a lovely, lovely afternoon and a good Sunday. And I'm gonna go for a walk really soon myself, for a gentle walk. Okay, Penny? You too? Yes? All right. Bye, Roger. Bye, Francis. Take care. Bye-bye.